Ambassador Jiwon felt the cold metal floor beneath her feet as she walked into the massive chamber aboard New Seoul Station. The place was huge, with walls that seemed to stretch forever into darkness. She had been here many times before for peaceful meetings, but today felt different. Today, the air itself seemed heavy with threat. The holographic projectors hummed to life around her, and suddenly she wasn't alone anymore. 12 massive figures appeared in the room, each one representing a different alien species from across the galaxy. These weren't friendly visitors coming to chat about trade deals or cultural exchange. These were the members of the Galactic Trade Council, and they had called this meeting for one reason only. The Vulcan representative stepped forward first. It was easily 3 times taller than Jiwon, with skin that looked like living crystal, and eyes that glowed with an inner light. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane, beautiful but terrifying at the same time. "Human representative," the Vulcan began, and Jiwon noticed how it didn't even bother using her name. "We have gathered today to inform your species of new requirements for continued operation in civilized galactic space." Jiwon kept her face perfectly neutral, even though her heart was starting to beat faster. She had been Earth's ambassador to the galaxy for 5 years now, and she knew when something bad was coming. The other council members were watching her with expressions that reminded her of cats playing with a mouse. "Your species will contribute 90% of all planetary economic output on an annual basis," the Vulcan continued, as if it was discussing the weather. "This payment serves as a protection fee, ensuring your continued existence among the civilized races of the galaxy." The words hit Jiwon like a physical blow. 90% of everything Earth produced. That would mean the end of human civilization as they knew it. People would starve, cities would crumble. Everything humanity had built over thousands of years would disappear, all to feed the greed of these 12 species. But Jiwon didn't let any of this show on her face. She had learned, long ago, that showing weakness to bullies only made them push harder. Instead, she simply nodded and waited for them to continue. The insectoid representative from the Zix Empire clicked its mandibles together in what Jiwon recognized as laughter. "We understand this may seem like a large amount to a primitive species, such as yours," it said, its voice buzzing like a swarm of angry bees. "But consider the alternative." Around the chamber, holographic displays began showing images that made Jiwon's blood run cold. Human colonies burning, Earth's cities in ruins, spaceships fleeing a dying world. The message was clear: pay up or die. 47 other species have received this same generous offer, added another council member, this one looking like a walking tree with too many eyes. All 47 chose wisdom over pride. All 47 still exist today because they understood their place in the galactic order. The Vulcan leaned down closer to Jiwon, and she could smell something like ozone and metal coming from its crystalline skin. "You have 30 standard days to deliver your species' acceptance of these terms. Failure to comply will result in complete economic isolation from all galactic trade networks, followed by military action to ensure compliance." Jiwon looked around the chamber at the 12 alien faces staring down at her. Some looked amused, others bored, as if this was just another routine business meeting for them. And maybe it was. Maybe they had done this so many times that threatening entire civilizations had become as normal as filing paperwork. "I understand your position," Jiwon said finally, her voice steady and calm. "I will relay your proposal to Earth's leadership immediately." The word proposal hung in the air for a moment, and several of the council members exchanged glances. It wasn't really a proposal, and everyone in the room knew it. It was an ultimatum, plain and simple. But Jiwon's choice of words suggested she didn't see it that way, which puzzled some of the aliens. "Excellent," the Vulcan said, straightening up to its full impressive height. "We look forward to your species' swift and intelligent response." The holograms began to fade one by one, until Jiwon was alone again in the vast chamber. But even after they were gone, she could still feel their presence, like a weight pressing down on her shoulders. She stood there for a long moment, thinking about what she would tell the people back on Earth. As she finally turned to leave, Jiwon allowed herself a small smile. The council members thought they knew everything about humanity, but they were about to learn something new. They were about to discover that humans didn't break as easily as they thought. President Minho sat at the head of the long metal table, deep underground beneath the Swiss mountains. The Situation Room had been built during the early days of space exploration, when humanity first realized they might not be alone in the universe. The walls were thick concrete and steel, designed to survive anything from nuclear war to alien invasion. Today, it felt like both might be possible. The room was packed with Earth's most important leaders. Military commanders, intelligence chiefs, scientists, and diplomats all crowded around the table, their faces lit by the glow of computer screens and holographic displays. Everyone was quiet, waiting to hear what Ambassador G1 had learned. During her meeting with the Galactic Trade Council, Admiral Somin stood up slowly, a tablet in her weathered hands. She had been fighting for humanity's freedom for over 30 years, first against human enemies, and now against threats from the stars. Her voice was steady and professional as she began to read, but everyone could hear the anger underneath. The Galactic Trade Council demands that humanity surrender 90% of all economic output annually, she said, pausing to let the words sink in. This includes all manufactured goods, raw materials, food production, and technological development. In exchange, they promise not to destroy our civilization entirely. The silence in the room was deafening. Some of the younger officials looked shocked, their faces pale with disbelief. Others, the veterans who had lived through humanity's darker chapters, simply nodded grimly. They had seen this kind of bullying before, just never on such a massive scale. Defense Minister Hyunwoo slammed his fist on the table, making everyone jump. 90% tribute, he growled, his voice thick with disgust. They don't want trade partners or allies. They want us as slaves, working ourselves to death to make them rich. Finance Minister Yoonji pulled up holographic charts showing what such demands would mean. If we gave them 90% of everything we produce, Earth's population would face immediate starvation. Our colonies would have to be abandoned. Billions would die within the first year. And that's exactly what they're counting on, added Intelligence Director Seung-ho. They've done this 47 times before. Every species either submitted completely or got wiped out trying to resist. They think we're just another primitive civilization that will roll over and accept slavery. President Minho listened to all of this without changing expression. His face was calm, almost peaceful, which surprised some of the newer members of his administration. They expected panic, anger, or at least some sign that he understood how desperate their situation had become. Instead, Minho simply leaned back in his chair and smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but something colder and more dangerous. They've made a mistake, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. They think they know everything about humanity, but they've only seen what we wanted them to see. He pressed a button on the table, and suddenly the room's main screen lit up with a single phrase, Protocol Omega. Several of the military commanders straightened up immediately, recognizing the code name even if the civilians didn't understand what it meant. Contact the Titan facility immediately, Minho ordered, his voice now carrying the full authority of his office. Tell Director Jae-hyun to begin Phase 1 preparations and send word to all colony administrators. It's time to drop the masks. Within minutes, seemingly ordinary messages began flowing through humanity's communication networks. To anyone listening in, they sounded like routine administrative traffic, supply requests, personnel transfers, maintenance schedules, research, updates, the kind of boring paperwork that kept a galactic civilization running smoothly. The Council's monitoring systems, which had been watching human communications carefully for any signs of panic or military preparation, found nothing alarming. No emergency broadcasts, no troop movements, no desperate calls for help to other species. Humanity seemed to be taking the news of their impending enslavement with remarkable calm. What the Council's sophisticated spy networks failed to understand was that humans had learned something important from their own violent history. The best way to prepare for war was to do it so quietly that your enemies never saw it coming. Every research station, manufacturing center, and exploration fleet had been receiving coded instructions for decades, preparing for the day when humanity might face exactly this kind of threat. Deep in the Titan facility orbiting Saturn, Director Jae-hyun received President Minho's message and allowed himself a grim smile. He had been waiting for this moment for 20 years, ever since humanity first made contact with the galaxy, and realized that peace was maintained through strength, not hope. Begin Phase 1, he told his staff, and across the solar system, humanity's true preparations finally began to show themselves. The Council thought they were dealing with sheep. They were about to discover they had cornered wolves instead. Council Chairman Vextar stood before the massive viewing window of his command station, watching the swirling storms of the gas giant Corvanus far below. The station was enormous, bigger than most cities, filled with the finest technology that 12 advanced civilizations could create. It was a symbol of power, a reminder to everyone in the galaxy of who really controlled things. Tonight, the station buzzed with celebration. In the Grand Conference Hall, representatives from all 12 council species had gathered to toast their latest victory. The air was thick with the sounds of alien languages mixing together, creating a symphony of satisfaction and greed. Holographic. Displays covered every wall, showing detailed maps of human space and everything it contained. Vextar's scaled hands moved through the air, manipulating the holographic projections like a conductor leading an orchestra. With each gesture, human territories changed color, showing which species would claim which prizes. Earth itself glowed bright red on the display, marked as the crown jewel of their latest conquest. "Look at this," Vextar said to his inner circle, his voice filled with the satisfaction of a predator who had cornered easy prey. 12 habitable worlds, countless mining operations, and a species that breeds quickly enough to provide centuries of cheap labor. We'll make more profit from the humans than we have from the last 10 species combined. The Korthak representative, a creature that looked like a living shadow with too many teeth, drifted closer to examine the projections. Their industrial capacity is impressive for such a primitive race, it acknowledged. These manufacturing centers could triple our production of luxury goods. And their research facilities, added the Volnari delegate, her crystalline body chiming softly as she moved. They've made remarkable progress in biotechnology. Once we control their scientists, we can accelerate our own medical advances by decades. The insectoid from the Zix Empire clicked its mandibles thoughtfully as it studied the human communication intercepts. The humans show remarkable composure for a species facing extinction, it observed, its compound eyes reflecting the holographic light. Most species panic immediately when they receive our demands. They flood the communications networks with desperate pleas for help, military mobilization orders, evacuation plans. But the humans, they seem almost calm. Vextar waved a dismissive hand, his attention focused on calculating profit margins. Perhaps they are more intelligent than we assumed, he said with a shrug. Some species are smart enough to recognize when resistance is pointless. They understand that submission means survival, while defiance means death. But intelligence without power is meaningless, he continued, manipulating the display to show humanity's pathetic military assets. Look at their fleet composition. The largest vessels they possess are barely bigger than our patrol boats. Their weapons are primitive kinetic projectiles that couldn't scratch the paint on our destroyers. They have no energy shields, no quantum torpedoes, no dimensional warfare capabilities. The assembled council members laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with grinding metal. They had heard this same assessment dozens of times before, about dozens of other species. Every civilization they encountered seemed impossibly weak, compared to the combined might of the 12 council races. "How long do you estimate before they surrender?" asked the hegemony representative, a massive creature covered in chitinous armor. "Days," Vextar replied confidently. "Once our fleets begin moving toward their space, they'll realize how hopeless their situation really is. No species has ever lasted more than a week once we begin the intimidation phase." Around the room, military commanders from all 12 species nodded in agreement. They had participated in this same ritual 47 times before, and it always ended the same way. A few displays of overwhelming force, Maybe a demonstration attack on an unimportant target, and then complete surrender. It was so routine that many of them treated these operations as training exercises for their junior officers. Admiral Kexthul of the Velkan fleet pulled up tactical displays showing the movement of Council forces. All battle groups are moving. Into position around human space, he reported. We'll have them completely surrounded within 6 standard days. Even if they tried to run, they have nowhere to go. And no one to run to, added Intelligence Chief Mordak. We've made sure that every other species in the galaxy understands the consequences of harboring fugitives from Council justice. The humans are completely alone. Vextar raised his ceremonial goblet, filled with fermented nectar from a dozen conquered worlds. To the newest addition to our empire, he declared, his voice echoing through the Great Hall, to the humans who will learn that intelligence means nothing without the power to back it up. The celebration continued deep into the night, with Council members already making plans for their new human territories. None of them noticed the small, seemingly routine communication signals that continued to flow between human installations. None of them recognized the significance of the calm, methodical way humanity was responding to their ultimatum. After all, no species had ever successfully resisted the Council's demands. Why should the humans be any different, Lieutenant Commander? Yuna pressed her face against the cold viewport, watching something that should have been impossible. The cargo ship. Peaceful Trader was changing right before her eyes, like a butterfly emerging from its cocoon, except this butterfly had teeth. She had seen this ship hundreds of times over the past 3 years. It was just another boring cargo hauler, the kind that moved supplies between colonies and mining stations. Nothing special about it at all. The crew always waved when they passed by, friendly folks just doing their job of keeping the outer colonies supplied with food and equipment. But now, massive panels were sliding away from the ship's hull with mechanical precision. Where there had been smooth metal before. Weapon ports were emerging like deadly flowers blooming in space. Sensor arrays unfolded from hidden compartments, their surfaces gleaming with advanced technology that definitely wasn't supposed to exist on a simple cargo ship. "This is incredible," Yuna whispered, unable to look away from the transformation. "How long has this been hidden?" Chief Engineer Dongmin looked up from his monitoring station, his fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed similar changes happening throughout human space. His weathered face carried a mixture of pride and grim determination that Yuna had never seen before. "Since the day we launched her," he replied, his voice steady but filled with hidden meaning. "The Peaceful Trader was never just a cargo ship. She's a warship disguised as a cargo ship, and she's not alone." The displays around them lit up with dozens of similar transformations. Ships that had been hauling ore and supplies for years were revealing hidden weapons systems. Research vessels that studied asteroids and gas clouds were suddenly bristling with military-grade sensors and communication arrays. "How many ships are converting?" Yuna asked, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "Every vessel in the outer colonies," Dongmin said, pulling up a system-wide map that made Yuna's jaw drop. Hundreds of ships were changing, each one revealing its true military nature. And it's not just the ships. Research stations are coming online too. The Ganymede facility just activated its main reactor for the first time in 20 years. Yuna stared at the display, trying to understand what this meant. Ganymede was supposed to be a simple research station studying Jupiter's moons. She had visited there during her training, and it seemed like nothing more than a collection of laboratories and living quarters. But if they were firing up a main reactor that had been dormant for decades, that meant Ganymede isn't really a research station, is it? She asked. Dongmin's smile was cold as winter. "Oh, it's definitely a research station. But the research they've been doing there isn't the kind that gets published in scientific journals. All across human space, the same scene was playing out. On the asteroid belt mining platform designated Station 7, workers were removing fake rock formations to reveal massive energy cannons. The mining equipment that had been working the asteroids for years was reconfiguring itself into defensive positions, ready to turn chunks of space rock into deadly projectiles. The research station orbiting Mars was undergoing its own transformation. Scientists who had spent years studying atmospheric conditions were now activating weapon systems and tactical computers that had been hidden beneath innocent-looking equipment. What the galaxy thought was humanity's attempt to understand their new home was actually humanity's preparation for war. Director Jae-hyun stood in the command center of the Titan facility, deep in Saturn's shadow, where alien sensors had trouble penetrating. Around him, technicians worked frantically at control stations that were coming alive for the first time in decades. Massive displays showed the status of human preparations across the entire solar system. The facility itself was a masterpiece of deception. To any casual observer, it looked like another research installation, the kind that human scientists use to study Saturn's rings and moons. But hidden beneath kilometers of ice and rock was something much more dangerous: humanity's most advanced military technology, developed in secret over the past 50 years. "Reactor core at full power," reported Chief Technician Nari, her voice tight with concentration. "All weapon systems are online. Defensive grids are active. Communication arrays are broadcasting on all frequencies," added systems analyst Woo Sung. "Every human facility is responding with ready status." Jae-hyun nodded, feeling the weight of decades of preparation finally paying off. He activated his secure communication link to Earth, knowing that President Minho was waiting for his report. "All units report ready status," he announced, his voice carrying across space to the underground bunker in Geneva. "Defensive positions are manned, weapon systems are active, and our ships have dropped their disguises. Humanity is prepared." The depths of space, what had appeared to be a peaceful human civilization, was revealing its true nature. They had spent 50 years preparing for this moment, building weapons in secret, training in shadows, and maintaining the careful illusion that they were just another primitive species stumbling through the galaxy. The Council thought they were threatening sheep. They were about to discover they had awakened sleeping wolves. The creature known as Theta 9 had been many things during its long career as a Council spy. It had been a maintenance worker on Vulcan stations, a trader on Zix merchant vessels, and even a diplomat's assistant during delicate negotiations. But it had never been as nervous as it was right now, floating through the ventilation shafts of the Mars orbital facility. This was supposed to be an easy assignment. Get inside. Document the humans' desperate surrender preparations. Maybe record some footage of them crying or begging for mercy. The Council leadership wanted evidence of humanity's weakness to show other species what happened when you refused their generous offers. Instead, Theta 9 was seeing things that made its 3 hearts beat faster with each passing minute. The facility looked normal enough from the outside, just another research station, the kind humans seemed to love building everywhere they went. But once Theta 9 managed to slip inside through a supposedly unused maintenance port, everything changed. The corridors were too wide, the power conduits too thick, and the security too sophisticated for a simple research facility. The spy's first major discovery came when it reached what was supposed to be a botanical laboratory. Through the ventilation grate, Theta 9 expected to see humans growing food crops or studying plant genetics. Instead, it found a workshop filled with weapons that shouldn't exist. Human technicians worked quietly on devices that made the spy's advanced sensors scream warnings. Energy shields that seemed to learn from each test firing, adapting their frequencies to block different types of attacks. Projectile weapons that somehow bent the fabric of space-time itself, allowing ammunition to strike targets that should have been protected by solid barriers. "These readings can't be right," Theta 9 whispered to itself, checking its equipment multiple times. The technology it was looking at was decades ahead of anything in the Council's arsenal. How could a primitive species that had barely learned to travel between stars create weapons like these? The spy's investigation continued deeper into the facility, and each new discovery was more shocking than the last. What appeared to be a communications center was actually an intelligence analysis station, filled with detailed information about every Council species, their military capabilities, their economic systems, and their political structures. Theta 9's blood ran cold as it realized what it was looking at. Holographic displays showed complete tactical analyses of Council worlds, including defense grids, troop movements, and strategic weaknesses. The humans hadn't just been studying Council technology during their decades of peaceful contact. They had been preparing for war. The most terrifying discovery came in a secured vault deep within the facility. Personnel files on every Council leader, detailed maps of military installations that were supposed to be secret, and trade route information that could cripple the galactic economy if it fell into the wrong hands. The humans knew everything about the Council's operations, down to the smallest details, but the worst revelation was yet to come. In the facility's central computer core, Theta 9 found files labeled with something called the Scorched Earth Protocol. The spy's translation system struggled with the human concept, but the meaning gradually became clear, and it was more horrifying than anything the Council had imagined. If threatened with extinction, humans wouldn't just fight back. They would ensure that their enemies paid such a catastrophic price that victory would become meaningless. The files contained detailed plans for targeting not just military installations, but the economic and social foundations of Council civilization itself. Theta 9 transmitted everything back to the Council command station, its hands shaking as it uploaded terabytes of intelligence data. The humans weren't preparing to surrender. They were preparing to burn the galaxy down around them if necessary, taking their enemies with them into the ashes. Back on the command station orbiting Corvinus, Chairman Vextar received the transmission with growing horror. His scaled hands trembled as he reviewed the evidence, his confidence evaporating like morning mist. "They've been studying us," he whispered to his inner circle, his voice barely audible. "For decades they've been learning our weaknesses while appearing primitive and harmless." Every trade meeting, every cultural exchange, every diplomatic contact was a chance for them to gather intelligence. The other Council members crowded around the displays, their various alien features twisted with disbelief and growing fear. The humans they had dismissed as primitive sheep were actually wolves in disguise, and they had been watching, learning, and preparing for this exact moment. "How is this possible?" demanded the Zix representative, its mandibles clicking nervously. "Our intelligence networks are the best in the galaxy. How did we miss all of this?" Vextar stared at the final piece of intelligence Theta 9 had transmitted, the details of humanity's Scorched Earth Protocol. Even if the Council won their war against humanity, the cost would be so devastating that their civilization might never recover. The humans had turned the Council's own strategy against them. They had made victory so expensive that it would feel like defeat, and defeat so costly that it would mean the end of everything the Council had built. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Trade Council faced an enemy that might actually be more dangerous than they were. The countdown timer on the main display of the Council command station reached 0 with mechanical precision. For 30 standard days, the galaxy's most powerful alliance had waited for humanity's inevitable surrender. They had prepared celebration feasts, divided up human territories among themselves, and even started planning which human colonies would provide the best slave labor. Chairman Vextar sat in his ceremonial throne, surrounded by representatives from all 12 Council species. The chamber buzzed with anticipation as they waited for the transmission that would mark humanity's complete submission to their will. After all, no species had ever been foolish enough to refuse their demands. The Watts communication console chimed softly, indicating an incoming signal from human space. Vextar smiled, his scaled lips pulling back to reveal rows of sharp teeth. "Finally," he said to his assembled council, "let's hear how the humans plan to beg for mercy." But instead of the expected surrender message, something else appeared on their screens that made every council member freeze in shock. Space itself seemed to bend and twist at the edge of their star system, and then suddenly, impossibly, a massive warship materialized from what had appeared to be empty void. The ship was enormous, easily 3 times larger than the Council's own flagship. Its hull was black as the space between stars, covered in weapon ports and sensor arrays that hurt to look at directly. Strange energy patterns danced along its surface, suggesting technology that the Council had never seen before. "What is that thing?" whispered the Zix representative, its compound eyes reflecting the impossible sight on their screens. Before anyone could answer, more ships began appearing around the massive dreadnought. Dozens of them, then hundreds, emerging from what the Council had thought was empty space. Each vessel was sleek and deadly, designed not for exploration or trade, but for war. The lead ship's identification beacon finally registered on the Council's computers. Indomitable. Even the name was a challenge, a statement that this vessel and its crew would never yield to outside pressure. A new face appeared on the Council chamber's main display, replacing their expected images of cowering human diplomats. Admiral Kyung-soo looked directly into the camera with eyes that held no fear, no desperation, no hint of surrender. Behind him, the bridge of the human flagship hummed with quiet activity, as crew members worked at stations that seemed to bend reality around them. The Admiral's uniform was simple and practical, without the elaborate decorations that Council officers loved to wear. But there was something about his presence that commanded respect, a quiet confidence that suggested he had faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious. "Members of the Galactic Trade Council," he began, his voice calm and professional, as if he was discussing the weather rather than rejecting the demands of the galaxy's most powerful alliance. "I am Admiral Kyung-soo of the Earth Defense Force. I am here to deliver humanity's response to your recent communication." Vextar leaned forward in his throne, confusion and growing anger warring in his expression. This wasn't how these meetings were supposed to go. Primitive species were supposed to grovel and beg, not appear with massive fleets and speak as equals. "The Galactic Trade Council's extortion attempt is rejected," Kyung-soo announced, each word falling like a hammer blow on the stunned silence of the chamber. "Your demands for tribute are unreasonable, your threats against innocent civilians are unacceptable, and your behavior toward peaceful species is a disgrace to civilized space." The Council members looked at each other in shock. In over 2 centuries of operations, no species had ever spoken to them like this. No one had ever called their protection fees extortion or dared to criticize their methods. Furthermore, the Admiral continued, his expression never changing from that calm professionalism, "You have 24 hours to withdraw all military forces from human space and issue a formal apology for your threats against Earth and her colonies. Failure to comply will result in immediate defensive action." Chairman Vextar's scaled features twisted with rage as the full impact of the human's words hit him. His voice came out as a roar that echoed through the chamber. "You dare threaten us? You are primitives with stolen technology. We have conquered 47 species across this galaxy. What makes you think you can stand against the combined might of the Council?" Kyung-soo's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a hardness that suggested he had heard threats like this before. "We are humans," he replied, simply, as if that explained everything. "And we do not submit to bullies. We've faced extinction before and survived. We've fought wars that would break other species and emerged stronger. The choice is yours, Chairman Vextar, peace or war. But understand this, if you choose war, you will discover that humanity has been preparing for this moment far longer than you realize." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the Council staring at blank screens. Outside their station, long-range sensors were going crazy as they tried to count the human ships that had appeared from nowhere. The fleet that surrounded the Indomitable was unlike anything in the Council's databases, filled with vessels that seemed to ignore several fundamental laws of physics. For the first time in their history, the Galactic Trade Council faced an enemy that wasn't afraid of them. And that realization sent a chill through every member of their alliance that no amount of firepower could warm. The silence in the Council chamber stretched on for what felt like hours, though it had only been minutes since Admiral Kyung-soo's transmission ended. Chairman Vextar stared at the blank screen where the human's calm face had been, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. No species had ever spoken to the Council like that. No one had ever dared to give them ultimatums. "This is intolerable," he finally growled, his scaled fists clenching so tight that his claws drew sparks from the metal armrests of his throne. "We are the masters of this galaxy. We decide who lives and who dies. These primitive humans think they can intimidate us with a few stolen ships and borrowed technology." Around the chamber, the other Council members shifted nervously. The human fleet outside their sensors was impressive, certainly larger than anything they had expected from such a young species. But surely it was all for show, right? Humans had barely been traveling between stars for a few decades. How could they possibly match the combined military might of 12 advanced civilizations? Perhaps we should consider their offer, suggested the Volnari representative, her crystalline voice tinkling with uncertainty. A tactical withdrawal might be cowardice, Vextar roared, slamming his fist on the control panel beside his throne. Warning lights flashed throughout the chamber as his anger triggered the station's alert systems. We do not negotiate with lesser species. We do not retreat from primitives who have forgotten their place in the galactic order. The other council members looked at each other with growing concern, but none dared to contradict their chairman directly. Vextar had ruled the council with an iron fist for over 50 years, and his temper was legendary throughout the galaxy. Ready, all battle fleets, he commanded, his voice echoing through the chamber with deadly authority. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier we have in this sector. I want those human vessels turned into scrap metal and their crews turned into examples for any other species that might think about defying us. Within hours, the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen began moving toward the human fleet. Over 800 warships, representing 12 different species and centuries of military development. Massive dreadnoughts from the Korthak Empire, swarm fighters from the Zix colonies, reality-bending weapon platforms from the Velkan supremacy. It was a force that had conquered star systems and broken entire civilizations. Admiral Thexmore of the Korthak fleet opened a communication channel to all council vessels as they approached the human formation. Remember, he broadcast to the combined fleet, these humans are primitives playing with technology they don't understand. One coordinated assault, and this will all be over. But as the council fleet closed the distance, something strange began happening to their sensor readings. The human ships weren't behaving like any vessels they had encountered before. They moved with perfect coordination, responding to threats, before the council ships had even finished targeting them. Their formation shifted and flowed like a living thing, always staying one step ahead of the attackers. The battle began when the Velkan forces opened fire with their quantum disruptors, weapons that could tear apart the fabric of space itself. The energy beams lanced across the void toward the human fleet, carrying enough power to vaporize entire moons. But when the weapons struck the human shields, something impossible happened. The barriers around the human ships seemed to learn from the attack, adapting their frequencies in real time to absorb and deflect the incoming energy. What should have been devastating hits became gentle light shows that barely registered on the human vessel's hulls. Impossible, whispered Admiral Thexmore as he watched his most powerful weapons fail completely. Those shields are adapting, faster than our targeting computers can adjust. The human response was swift and terrible. Weapons that the Council had never seen before reached out across space, and wherever they touched, Council ships simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed in massive explosions, not torn apart by conventional forces, but somehow deleted from reality, as if they had never been there at all. Captain Sunwoo stood on the bridge of the destroyer, defiant, watching the tactical display with grim satisfaction. Around her, the crew worked with the quiet efficiency that had become humanity's trademark in combat. No shouting, no panic, just professional soldiers doing what they had trained their entire lives to do. Enemy formation is breaking apart, reported her tactical officer. They're trying to retreat, but our pursuit squadrons are staying with them. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted exactly 37 minutes. When it was over, 60% of the Council's mighty fleet was nothing but debris floating in the cold void of space. The survivors fled in terror, their vessels damaged, and their crews broken by the sight of humanity's overwhelming technological superiority. Not a single human ship had been destroyed. Not one. Signal all vessels, Captain Sunwoo ordered, her voice carrying clearly across the communication networks. Pursue and document everything. The galaxy needs to know what happens when peaceful species are threatened. The galaxy needs to see that bullies can be stopped. Within hours, news of the battle spread across every inhabited star system. The supposedly primitive humans had just demolished the most powerful military force in known space, and they had done it so completely that it barely qualified as a fight. The age of council dominance was over, ended in 37 minutes by a species that refused to bow to tyrants. The collapse began immediately after the last council survivors limped away from the battlefield. Across the galaxy, species that had lived in fear of the council's demands for generations suddenly realized that their oppressors were no longer invincible. The news of humanity's victory spread faster than light itself, carried by traders, diplomats, and refugees who had witnessed the impossible. But what happened next was even more shocking than the battle itself. Within days of the Council fleet's destruction, human ships began appearing in star systems across the galaxy. Not warships this time, but the same merchant and exploration vessels that had been peacefully trading and conducting research for decades. Except now these ships were revealing their true purpose. The Altarian Trade Federation was the first to understand what had really been happening. When the human vessel, Starbound Explorer, docked at their main commercial hub, Captain Hayon didn't come aboard asking to buy supplies or conduct research. Instead, she presented the Altarian leadership with detailed intelligence files about their own government, military capabilities, and economic systems. "We've been watching," she explained to the stunned Altarian Council. "For 30 years, every human ship that has visited your space has been gathering information. We know your trade routes, your defensive positions, your political structure, and your relationships with other species. We know everything." The same scene played out across dozens of star systems. Human explorers revealed themselves as intelligence operatives who had been mapping the galaxy's power structures for decades. Merchant vessels admitted they had been studying alien technology and economic systems while pretending to engage in simple trade. Every peaceful contact between humans and other species had been an opportunity to learn, to gather intelligence, and to prepare for the day when that knowledge might be needed. Director Minji stepped off her transport ship onto the crystal walkways of the Volnari homeworld, her diplomatic credentials in order, but her message anything but diplomatic. She had been Earth's cultural exchange coordinator for 15 years, visiting dozens of worlds to study alien art and literature. Now she was revealing her true role as one of humanity's most experienced intelligence officers. "The old system is finished," she told the Volnari leadership, her voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "The Council's extortion network is broken, and it's never coming back. You have a choice to make. Join humanity's new Galactic Cooperation Framework, or face the same consequences as those who supported the extortion system." The offer she presented was remarkably different from anything the galaxy had seen before. Instead of tribute payments and forced submission, humanity proposed mutual defense agreements and equitable trade relationships. Species would contribute to galactic security based on their capabilities, not their fear. Trade would be conducted for mutual benefit, not to enrich a parasitic ruling class. Most species embraced the offer immediately. The Altarians, who had been paying 40% of their economic output to the Council for over a century, jumped at the chance for fair trade agreements. The Meridian colonies, whose young people had been conscripted into Council labor forces for generations, eagerly signed mutual defense pacts that would protect them from future exploitation. But not everyone was willing to give up the old ways peacefully. The Korthak hegemony, one of the Council's founding members, refused to acknowledge that their empire was finished. They tried to continue collecting tribute from their subject species, enforcing their demands with threats and violence, just as they always had. That's when they learned another lesson about humanity's capabilities. General Seokjin of the Korthak military woke up one morning to find that none of his warships would start. The mighty dreadnoughts that had terrorized star systems for decades sat dead in space, their power cores mysteriously offline and their weapon systems completely unresponsive. When his technicians tried to investigate, they found computer viruses so sophisticated that they seemed almost alive, rewriting system code faster than it could be repaired. The hegemony's economic networks suffered similar problems. Trade computers crashed, communication systems failed, and financial records mysteriously disappeared from secure databases. Within weeks, the Korthak government was paralyzed, unable to function without the technological systems that humanity had quietly compromised. Similar technical difficulties plagued every species that tried to maintain the old system of galactic extortion. Military assets malfunctioned at critical moments. Economic systems suffered cascading failures. Communication networks experienced temporary outages that lasted for months. The message was clear: join humanity's cooperative framework, or watch your civilization slowly grind to a halt. Within 6 months, the transformation was complete. The galaxy that had been ruled by fear and exploitation for centuries was now operating under humanity's new paradigm of voluntary cooperation and mutual respect. Former enemies worked together on joint projects. Species that had been enslaved for generations were now equal partners in galactic trade. The Council's extortion racket had been replaced with something the galaxy had never seen before: a system based on justice instead of power, cooperation instead of dominance, and shared prosperity instead of concentrated wealth. And overseeing it all were the humans, the species that had proven that sometimes the only way to create peace was to be prepared for war. Ambassador G1 walked slowly through the corridors of what had once been the Council's command station, her footsteps echoing off walls that had witnessed centuries of galactic oppression. Everything looked different now, though the physical structure remained the same. The cold, intimidating chambers where alien species had been forced to surrender their freedom had been transformed into something warmer, more welcoming. Today marked exactly 1 year since she had stood in this same place, listening to the Council's impossible demands for tribute. Back then, the station had felt like a predator's den, filled with the arrogance of beings who believed might made right. Now it buzzed with the productive energy of over 200 species working together as genuine equals. The main assembly hall was packed with representatives from across the galaxy. Creatures of every imaginable shape and size sat together, discussing trade agreements, sharing scientific discoveries, and planning joint defense operations. The Altarians were explaining their new agricultural techniques to the Meridian researchers. The Volnari were collaborating with human engineers on improved shield technology. Former enemies were now partners, bound together by mutual respect rather than fear. As G1 took her place at the podium, she couldn't help but smile at how much had changed. The same chamber where the Council had once divided up human territories, like pieces of meat, now hosted the headquarters of the Galactic Defense Coalition. The holographic displays that had shown humanity's expected enslavement now tracked cooperative missions and shared resources across hundreds of star systems. President Minho's image materialized above the assembly, his holographic form clear enough to see the satisfaction in his eyes. He had aged in the past year, the stress of rebuilding galactic civilization taking its toll, but he looked more at peace than G1 had ever seen him. "Friends and allies," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's advanced acoustics. "Today marks the first anniversary of humanity's introduction to galactic politics. 1 year ago, we learned that this galaxy was ruled by fear and exploitation. We discovered that peaceful species lived in constant terror of stronger neighbors who demanded tribute and submission. Around the assembly hall, representatives nodded grimly. Many of them had lived under the Council's thumb for generations, watching their people work themselves to death to satisfy impossible tribute demands. The memories of those dark days were still fresh, even as they celebrated their newfound freedom. We could have simply defended ourselves and left the rest of the galaxy to suffer, Minho continued. We could have become another dominant power, ruling through strength rather than justice. But that's not who we are. Humanity chose to offer something different. G1 looked around the chamber, seeing the faces of beings whose lives had been transformed by humanity's decision to fight for justice rather than dominance. The Kepler colonies, which had been strip-mined for decades to feed Council greed, were now thriving industrial centers that kept their own profits. The Tau Ceti research stations, once forced to develop weapons for their oppressors, were now pursuing peaceful scientific advancement. The former Council species have discovered something they never expected, Minho said, his holographic image gesturing toward the assembled representatives. They've learned that cooperation is more profitable than exploitation. Fair trade agreements have brought them more prosperity than centuries of extortion ever did. This was absolutely true. The Korthak hegemony, once one of the Council's most brutal enforcers, was now enjoying unprecedented economic growth through legitimate trade partnerships. The Zix Empire had discovered that voluntary cooperation produced better results than forced labor. Even the Velkan supremacy, despite their initial resistance, had admitted that the new system was superior to their old methods. Smaller species, that were once prey to stronger neighbors, now sleep safely under our mutual defense agreements, the president continued. Pirates and raiders have learned that attacking peaceful traders means facing the combined response of 200 allied civilizations. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Before humanity's intervention, weak species had lived in constant fear of stronger neighbors who might decide to conquer them on a whim. Now they enjoyed protection under defense pacts that treated all members as equals, regardless of their size or military capabilities. The galaxy has learned that humans don't seek dominion, Minho said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. We don't want to rule over other species or extract tribute from the weak. We seek justice, equality, and the chance for every sentient being to live free from fear. As the president's speech concluded, Jiwon felt a deep sense of satisfaction settle over her. Humanity had faced the greatest challenge in their history and emerged not just victorious but transformed. They had proven that power could be used to protect rather than exploit, that strength could serve justice rather than greed. The Council's age of extortion was over forever. In its place, humanity had built something the galaxy had never seen. Before, a civilization based on cooperation, mutual respect, and shared prosperity. And anyone who threatened that peace would discover what the Council had learned too late. Humanity's response would change the galaxy forever.